So, imagine this scenario.
Okay.
You've just closed on this beautiful, breezy property right near the coast. We're talking Clearwater, Florida.
Oh, gorgeous area.
Right. And you're walking through the space, you're smelling the salt air, and in your mind, the transformation has already begun. Like you're visualizing
Right.
exactly where those load-bearing walls are coming down.
Inchwood.
You're mapping out this massive open concept kitchen. You know, the one with the big waterfall island.
Oh, yeah. Everybody wants the waterfall island right now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You are just totally ready to turn this kind of aging coastal structure into your modern oasis. You've got the financing secured, your vision is crystal clear, and you're just itching to break ground. Then, seemingly out of absolutely nowhere, this hidden bureaucratic trapdoor swings wide open and completely derails the entire operation. I mean, your dream renovation just screeches to a halt before a single permit is even issued. So welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're analyzing this hyper-specific and genuinely eye-opening guide from Construction Corps. It's titled, Navigating the FEMA 50% Rule in Pinellas County Renovations.
It's a fascinating piece of material, honestly, primarily because it outlines this regulatory reality that, literally every single person looking to buy, build, or renovate property in a coastal flood zone is eventually going to slam into.
Right.
And this isn't just some minor zoning quirk,
Yeah.
It is a massive structural and financial hurdle and routinely catches incredibly savvy real estate investors and ambitious homeowners, too, just completely off guard.
And that's exactly our mission for today's deep dive. We are going straight into the mechanics of this notorious FEMA 50% rule. We're looking specifically at how it operates in Clearwater and the broader Pinellas County area.
Which is ground zero for this kind of thing.
Completely. We're going to figure out what actually triggers this regulation, why it manages to blindside so many projects right in the middle of the design phase, and, how to actually avoid these massive dream-crushing delays. Okay, let's unpack this. What is the fundamental architecture of the FEMA 50% rule, and why does it act as such a trapdoor for coastal renovations?
Well, the foundation of the trapdoor really comes down to this very strict intersection of geography and mathematics.
Okay.
So the 50% rule is actually a federal standard, but it's applied locally to properties that are located in designated special flood hazard areas.
Got it.
In the Clearwater and Pinellas County region specifically, we're largely talking about AE and VE zones. Now, for anyone operating in coastal real estate, you probably know that an AE zone generally represents areas that are subject to pooling or rising floodwaters.
Right, like storm surge coming up the strait.
Exactly. But VE zones represent the splash zone.
The splash zone.
Yeah, these are areas subject to the additional kinetic energy and the literal destructive force of wave action. So, if your property sits in one of these zones, you are bound by a very specific calculation.
And here's the math.
Here's the math. If the cost of the improvements or the repairs you want to make to your home equals or exceeds 50% of the structure's current market value.
50%.
50%. If you hit that, the project is officially reclassified by the local municipality. It is no longer considered just a standard renovation. It is legally deemed a substantial improvement.
Substantial improvement. I mean, it sounds like such a generic, boring, administrative term.
It really does.
But in the world of building codes, crossing that threshold represents an entirely different universe of compliance. But wait, let's break down that math a bit more, because this is where I think the biggest disconnect happens for buyers.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, if someone buys a waterfront teardown in Pinellas County for, say, $1.5 million, their renovation budget isn't automatically capped at $750,000, right? The county actually separates the dirt from the drywall.
That is the crucial distinction. And it's precisely where these projects begin to unravel. What's fascinating here is that the 50% threshold is based solely and exclusively on the depreciated value of the physical structure itself.
Just the house.
Just the house.
Yeah.
It explicitly excludes the value of the land, the landscaping, the detached structures, even the pool.
Wow.
Think about it. When you're buying coastal Florida real estate, a massive premium is baked into the location alone. You're paying for the proximity to the Gulf, the waterfront footage, the spectacular view.
Right, you're buying the sunset.
You're buying the sunset. So you might easily drop $1.5 million on a property, but that aging 1970s block house sitting on that $1 million piece of dirt, it might only be valued by the county at $300,000.
So, okay, so using that exact scenario from the source material, If the physical structure is only valued at $300,000, your 50% threshold is exactly $150,000,
That's your ceiling.
meaning the absolute maximum you can spend on improving that house without triggering the substantial improvement classification is $149,999. And in a coastal market where you are paying top dollar for materials and labor anyway, a $150,000 budget for a full-scale home renovation disappears incredibly fast.
It evaporates. I mean, it's gone in a flash. And the county doesn't just take your word for what the house is worth either, nor do they care what you recently paid for the total property.
They have their own math.
They do. Pinellas County relies on very specific valuation methods. They'll typically look at the property appraiser's data for the structural value, which, by the way, is often aggressively depreciated.
Right.
Now, if you don't like that number, you can commission an independent appraisal. But it has to be a very specific type of appraisal that isolates the actual cash value of the structure, and it has to account for physical depreciation. It's a highly specialized metric.
So you have this incredibly tight ceiling. You're capped at $150,000 for your remodel. A homeowner might look at that and think, all right, things are expensive, but I'll just be strategic.
I'll budget carefully.
Right. I'll manage my materials, I'll keep the existing footprint, and I'll carefully track what goes into that budget. But here's where it gets really interesting and honestly a bit ruthless.
Yeah, it does.
The guide breaks down the nickel and dime details of what the county actually forces you to include in that $150,000 limit. And it's not just the obvious stuff like structural additions or moving load-bearing walls.
No, the umbrella of what counts is staggering.
The inclusion list is comprehensive to the point of being almost punitive.
It really is. The rule essentially dictates that if a cost is tied to the permitted improvement of the home, it goes into the calculation, period.
Period.
This obviously covers all your major interior renovations, your new kitchen cabinets, the bathroom remodels, all of that. But it also strictly captures all mechanical, electrical, and plumbing upgrades, the MEP stuff.
Which you have to do.
Exactly. If you buy an older coastal home, you almost certainly have to update the electrical panel to meet modern safety codes, or you have to replace those aging cast iron plumbing stacks. All of that necessary, unglamorous infrastructure work eats directly into your aesthetic renovation budget.
And it doesn't stop at the infrastructure either. You want to replace the roof. That counts. You want to upgrade to impact-resistant windows and doors, which, let's be honest, is practically mandatory if you want to insure a house in a hurricane zone.
You have to have them.
That massive expense counts toward your threshold. Built-in cabinetry counts. Even the flooring counts. If you're tearing out old carpet to put down engineered hardwood throughout the house, the materials and the labor for that floor are ticking your budget closer to that 50% red line.
And we haven't even touched on what is arguably the most frustrating inclusion for homeowners.
Oh, the demolition costs.
The demolition costs.
This is the part that feels like a gut punch. You have to pay a crew to come in and gut the 1970s kitchen. You have to pay for the dumpsters, the hauling fees, the landfill charges. And the cost of literally throwing the old house away counts against your limit for building the new one.
It's wild.
It actively penalizes you just for prepping the site.
It does. It really does. But when you synthesize this exhaustive list, the underlying logic of the regulation does become clear. Local building departments are looking at the absolute total scope of the permitted work. They demand detailed, line-item cost estimates from your contractor.
So no hiding things.
No. There's no gray area where you can creatively categorize the impact windows as just maintenance to keep them off the ledger. If it is part of the permitted project, it counts against the value of the structure.
Well, knowing human nature, when faced with a strict boundary like this, people immediately start looking for loopholes.
Of course they do.
And the guide explicitly addresses a very common strategy that homeowners attempt, which is phasing the work. A buyer might look at the rules and say, okay, the limit is $150,000. I'll just pull a permit for the kitchen and the floors this year for $100,000. We'll live in it for a bit, and then next year, I'll pull a totally separate permit for the roof and the windows.
Which naturally raises an important question regarding bureaucratic enforcement and look-back periods. Can you simply slice a massive project into smaller, separate permits to outsmart the 50% calculation?
Right. Can you game this system?
The source is unequivocal on this. Attempting to game the system through phased permitting is a highly dangerous strategy in Pinellas County.
Don't do it.
Don't do it. The permit review process is rigorous. Modern municipal software tracks cumulative improvements on a single parcel over time. If the county officials review your history and determine that your separate projects are actually just one phased, substantial improvement designed to circumvent the floodplain regulations, They will halt the project and consolidate the costs.
Wow. Which means you trigger the rule anyway, but now you are in trouble with the building department mid-construction.
A nightmare scenario.
Truly. So let's talk about the actual consequences. Let's say the structural value is $300,000. You submit your plans, the county reviews the true costs of your impact windows, the MEP upgrades, the demolition, and your beautiful new kitchen. The total comes back at $160,000.
You're over.
You hit the 50% mark, you cross the line. What is the immediate domino effect?
This is the mid-design surprise that derails dreams.
Yeah.
Once you cross that 50% threshold, the scope of your project fundamentally changes. It is no longer just about remodeling the interior. The federal and local mandate kicks in, requiring that the entire existing structure must now be brought into full compliance with current floodplain regulations and elevation standards.
The entire structure.
The entire structure.
So even the guest bedrooms you weren't planning on touching or the garage you were leaving alone, the whole house is suddenly non-compliant.
Precisely. You triggered the rule with a kitchen and a roof, and suddenly the municipality dictates that your 1970s elevation is totally unacceptable.
Wow.
And for coastal Florida, the specific engineering requirements to achieve that compliance can be monumental. The most significant mandate is usually that the lowest finished floor of the living space must be elevated to meet or exceed the current base flood elevation, plus any required freeboard.
Freeboard.
Yeah, freeboard is essentially an extra margin of safety required by the local code, like an extra foot or two above the flood line.
Let's pause on that, because when we talk about elevating a home in Florida, we're usually talking about slab-on-grade block construction.
Yes, heavy concrete.
We aren't just talking about jacking up a wooden house on a crawl space. You're talking about physically severing a concrete blockhouse from its foundation and lifting it into the air?
It is an incredible feat of structural engineering. And it doesn't stop at the floor height either. Your utility systems, the HVAC compressors, the main electrical panels, the water heaters, anything vulnerable to a storm surge has to be relocated above that floodplain.
Right.
Furthermore, depending on whether you're in an AE zone or that high-velocity VE zone we discussed earlier, the foundation systems themselves might require total modification.
Meaning what, exactly?
Well, a VE zone might require you to completely abandon the existing continuous foundation and install deep pilings. This is to allow wave action to literally pass underneath the home without destroying it.
So you walked into an architect's office wanting a nice island and some hardwood floors. And now the county is telling you to drive concrete pilings into the earth and lift your house 10 feet in the air.
Pretty much.
The escalation of scope is almost comical if it wasn't so financially devastating.
It is a massive shock.
When a homeowner is faced with that reality, the guide lays out 3 incredibly harsh choices. Choice number 1. You lean into it. You accept the substantial improvement classification, you bite the bullet, and you lift the structure. You undergo the massive structural engineering headache to elevate the home and bring the entire property up to modern coastal codes.
Which is a path some take, particularly if the home has significant historical or architectural value that you just can't replicate.
Yeah.
But it is a hyper-expensive, logistically complex undertaking.
Yeah.
Which leads to choice number 2, which is equally extreme. You demolish and rebuild.
Start fresh.
Start fresh. Many property owners hit the 50% threshold, run the numbers on what it actually costs to safely elevate a 50-year-old blockhouse, and realize the math simply doesn't work. It often makes more financial and structural sense to just bulldoze the existing $300,000 structure, clear that $1 million dirt, and build a brand new, perfectly compliant, elevated home from scratch.
Sometimes it really is cheaper to just start over.
It is.
And then there's choice number 3, which is probably the most common, but also the most painful. You retreat.
The retreat.
You go back to the drawing board and you aggressively reduce the project scope. You cross the new roof off the list. You cancel the impact windows. You decide to just keep the old tile floors. You desperately value engineer your dream renovation down to $149,000 just to stay under the county's radar.
It's an agonizing compromise to make, especially when you've already invested significant time and money into the design phase. To help owners grapple with this specific crossroads, the source actually references a companion piece of reading titled, "Is it better to lift or rebuild a home in coastal Florida?"
Oh, that's a perfect follow-up.
It is. It highlights that once you hit this regulatory wall, you are no longer making aesthetic choices. You're making fundamental structural and financial decisions about the viability of the asset.
It really is a structural decision point. The aesthetic design is completely held hostage by the structural reality of the property. So the obvious question is, How does anyone successfully renovate an older home in Clearwater without falling into this trapdoor?
Good question.
How do you know where the boundary is before you spend $20,000 on architectural plans that the county is just going to flat out reject?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture of construction management,
Hmm.
the only way to survive this regulatory minefield is absolute foresight.
Right.
You cannot operate in silos. You can't just hire an architect to draw up your dream home, hand those finished blueprints to an independent structural engineer to stamp, and then finally hand them to a general contractor to bid out.
Because they aren't talking to each other.
Exactly. If you follow that traditional fragmented path, you won't realize your $50,000 over the FEMA threshold until the contractor submits the permit application to Pinellas County. And by then, it is entirely too late.
Which brings us to the authors of this guide, Construction Corps. The source provides a breakdown of who they are, and looking at their operational model, it makes perfect sense why they wrote a survival guide for the 50% rule.
It really does.
They are a veteran-owned and operated general contractor specifically serving Clearwater and the greater Tampa Bay region. But they're using this guide as a case study for why a specific type of business model is practically required for coastal construction today.
Exactly. They operate as a unified design-build firm.
Yeah.
They are managing these complex projects from the initial conceptual design phase all the way through the final construction, completely under one roof. But the critical differentiator and the real reason they can navigate the FEMA regulations so effectively is their in-house integration. They aren't just farming out the difficult compliance work to third parties.
Right, the guide outlines their credentials, and it is a heavy list. I mean, they aren't just holding a standard general contractor's license, the CGC 1530192. They hold the actual state licenses for electrical work, EC 13013956, and plumbing, CFC 1432954. They hold a mold-related services license, MRSR 4642.
It's a lot of numbers.
It is. But the absolute game changer for dealing with structural elevations and the 50% rule is that they actively operate as a licensed engineering firm, FBPE 39242.
Having structural engineering integrated directly into the design-build process is the key to solving this problem early. It means the team that is drafting the architectural layout for your new kitchen is sitting literally across the desk from the structural engineers who are calculating the floodplain compliance, and the project estimators who are tracking the real-time costs against the county's appraised structure value.
It's the ultimate reality check built right into the design phase.
Exactly.
If you tell the architect you want to add a massive master suite, the estimator and the engineer can immediately flag it. They can say, look, based on the county's data, our ceiling is $150K. If we add that suite, we cross the 50% mark, which means we have to elevate the entire house. Do we want to proceed and design an elevated home, or do we want to scale back the suite?
You make that massive financial decision on day one, not 6 months later when the county rejects your permits.
Exactly.
They evaluate the substantial improvement exposure concurrently with the design. By specializing in regulated coastal construction, complex additions, and structural modifications governed by the strict Florida Building Code, this integrated model prevents those mid-project redesigns and the catastrophic delays that plague so many traditional renovations in the Tampa Bay area.
So what does this all mean?
Yeah.
Addressing you directly, the listener.
Yeah.
Whether you are trying to navigate building an ADU, an accessory dwelling unit in your Tampa Bay backyard, or you're evaluating a coastal commercial property, or you're simply sketching out a full-scale renovation of a classic Florida block home, this deep dive highlights a brutal truth about modern real estate.
It really does.
The invisible math of your house is infinitely more important than the aesthetics. You can spend weeks picking out the perfect quartzite countertops and the most beautiful custom built-ins, but the local bureaucracy, the flood zones, and the building codes fundamentally dictate the boundaries of your imagination.
100%.
The FEMA 50% rule is the silent, unforgiving partner in every coastal renovation. If you don't understand the strict parameters of the game before you start spending money, the game is going to play you.
It is a sobering but completely necessary reality for anyone operating in coastal markets. But analyzing this rule also leaves us with a rather profound and perhaps troubling final thought to consider.
Let's hear it.
We know that global weather patterns are shifting, and we know that the federal maps defining these special flood hazard areas are constantly being reevaluated and redrawn. As AE and VE zones inevitably expand further inland over the coming decades, how many unsuspecting landlocked homeowners might suddenly wake up to find their properties reclassified?
That is a terrifying thought.
Right. Will a time come when a simple, unlimited kitchen remodel in a standard suburban neighborhood is suddenly subjected to this exact same grueling 50% calculation? We might be looking at a future where the strict, heavy-handed bureaucracy of coastal construction becomes the standard reality for all of us.
A fascinating, if slightly ominous, perspective to end on. It perfectly illustrates why understanding these bureaucratic mechanisms today is so crucial, regardless of how close you currently live to the water.
Absolutely.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Remember, whether you're planning to tear out a few walls or tear off an entire roof, your project's success entirely depends on knowing the invisible rules governing your property. Until next time.